All right. Well, welcome back to another quick, hopefully, coaches chat. If you tuned into our last coaches chat, we introduced the month of March and how we're going to be spending the month busting nutrition and health myths. So over the past couple of weeks, we've been asking you guys for questions, for myths that you might want to know if they're, if we can justify them or if we want to bust them, and go into a little bit more detail about that too. So we have a lot of different questions, myths that we've been getting from you guys. So we're going to go quickly through a bunch of them today. Now, we understand that it is important to understand the parameters of each question, each myth that we are going to be talking about, right? When they are asked to us, it's pretty general. So we want to make sure that when we are answering it, we're defining whether or not we're talking about in the realm of performance or in the realm of health. And there's also, this underlying danger of, talking about foods or concepts as being good or bad. As we talked about in the last chat as well, it's all about context. And if we weren't, just going to be put on the spot to answer these questions, we'd probably say, it depends, and then want to dig a little bit deeper into your specific reason for answering or asking these questions. But for the sake of time, we're not going to be doing that for every single question that we are getting. So pass it over to Ben to kind of dig into a little bit more about, those relative terms of good and bad, and how we tend to approach those as a company as well.
That's right, Megs. We're going to try and keep it quick.
Always try.
And context is important, right? You hit the nail on the head. Context is super important. And essentially what we're seeing with a lot of the questions is that kind of like, is this particular thing good or bad, right? And inherently what we're saying is like, well, it is contextually important, and it does depend on circumstance, because there might be a scenario where something is not advisable for someone pursuing a certain goal, but it's essential for someone else pursuing their certain goal, right? So I think a lot of the ones that we're particularly going through today that we've received pretty quickly off the bat, that is an issue, is that there's a distortion of terms and distortion of tactics that are used in a performance, arena, that when crossed over to the mainstream don't make sense, right? And vice versa. So again, when we're looking at certain elements of nutrition or training or lifestyle, it's very important to consider context, because in a certain situation, depending on what you're trying to do, something might be super important, right? But just like, any kind of nutritional practice, what's good for you isn't necessarily good for everyone else all the time completely, right? And that is important now, especially when we use relative terms. What is good or bad, and again, like, it depends on the situation and the context and the circumstance. So we need to be super careful when we're asking, is something good or is something bad, that we understand that in a certain situation, it might be inadvisable, not necessarily bad, right? But I think that the terms good or bad as well, like we always talk about, we want to be really careful with using in general, right? Because if you associate a food group or a type of food or a specific practice as something that's bad, then you inherently start to believe that that makes you a bad person for doing that, right? And we can spiral down, and like you said, trying to keep it brief, we're not going to spiral down into all the ways that can then dispel into future decision-making and behavior and habit. But suffice to say that, like, it's not a road that you want to go down, right? So we try to remain as objective as possible when it comes to decision-making and choices, and understand that based on the context and circumstance, some choices are going to be better than others, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. And so a little bit of a challenge for you today, Ben. I'm going to take you through a few of the top questions that we have received. Oftentimes, these have been asked multiple times. That's why we've picked them. So I'm going to fire the questions at you, and I'm going to set my timer for 2 minutes and give you 2 minutes to answer them. I will give you a 30-second warning, so you know when to start wrapping it up. But hopefully this will be able to keep things short, concise, keep people engaged so that they can actually get the full extent of your answer. And then, of course, if anybody wants, us to expand on this or have any questions specific to themselves, please do reach out.
Cool. Ready? Let's do it. Yep.
Sweating? Just kidding.
To take one big deep breath so that I don't waste time breathing for the 2 minutes.
All right. The first question, Is it bad to have carbs at night?
Okay. So again, straight off the bat, like refer back to the last, I guess, 2 minutes of this podcast, right? And again, what we're talking about here, especially where carbohydrates are concerned, is generally fluctuations in scale weight, right? So are carbs at night good or bad? Well, if you train at night, if I have clients who train later at night, they train in the evening, I still want them to get the majority of their carbohydrates in and around their training sessions, right? So for that particular individual, I still want them to do that, you know. Now, that being said, what that probably is going to equate to is that if they're getting up in the morning and weighing themselves, they're going to be artificially high for a number of reasons, right? Number one, they probably got the bulk amount of their food and calories in for the day later in the day before going to bed, right? And number two, carbohydrates inherently hold more water. So there's going to be a few reasons why their scale weight, you know, is going to trend up that has zero to do with body composition change, right? So in that instance, it's fine to eat carbohydrates at night. Now, if you're not a performance athlete or if you are not super active, do you want to eat the majority of your carbohydrates for the day later in the day when your activity level is lower, presumably lower than over the course of the rest of the day? Probably not, right? In terms of health and body composition, so long as you're eating an appropriate amount of carbohydrates that comes into your appropriate amount of calories over the course of the day, it doesn't make a difference. It's not going to inherently affect you one way or another in terms of body composition, but you probably find that you wake up feeling heavier the next morning. And for some people, that's a panic station that all scale weight is indicative of fat mass laydown, right?
Excellent. With time to spare.
Okay. Do I get to carry over spare time into follow questions?
Okay, next question. Do I need to have protein shakes to gain lean mass?
Cool. So straight off the bat, do you have to? No, you do not have to. But we do often recommend that our clients take protein supplements as part of a diverse nutrient-based diet because many people do struggle to make an adequate amount of protein consumption over the course of the day. Okay. So my preference for all my clients would be get your protein from whole food sources. There's much more micronutrient benefit, digestive benefit, you know, protein and bioavailability benefit from eating real food than you get from the shakes. Satiation, even just the pleasure of eating, right? That is often missed when you're just having a shake. But especially when clients are new to program and there's a gap between how much protein they're used to eating and how much we'd like them to eat, a shake is a really good way to help get an extra 25 to 30 grams into them over the course of the day. So not essential, but sometimes super convenient and super helpful. Yeah.
I think it might be, with the time we have to spare, helpful to define what gaining lean mass means.
Yeah, so we're talking about the laydown of muscle tissue, right? So when we're in the gym, when we're training, we're not actually building muscle in the gym, we're breaking it down. Right. And protein synthesis is the primary, I guess, mechanism of repairing that muscle. And when we repair muscle tissue, we repair over the top of torn muscle tissue. So that's growth in repair and protein synthesis, of which obviously the name suggests protein is super important for that. Right. So making sure you're getting enough depending on your goals is super important. Yes, but it does not have to come from a supplement form. Right.
Perfect. Sorry, I didn't give you the 30-second warning there.
Oh, thanks.
Okay, next question. Love this one. Is coffee good or bad?
Okay, so another kind of relative term. And again, it depends on the context. Coffee in itself is just coffee, right? It's not good or bad. It hasn't committed any crimes. It's not going out of its way to help you, right? So again, let's be specific that we're talking about caffeine consumption for the most part, okay? And again, like timing does matter, all right? So if you're having one coffee in the morning as part of your like morning ritual, then there's no issue depending on circumstance, right? And again, I shouldn't say there's no issue because for some people there might be, but how sensitive you are to caffeine, if you can really feel the effects, if you don't feel the effects at all. If you're having multiple coffees in a day, my argument might be it's a Band-Aid, right? So if we're feeling that our energy is dipping or that we're super tired and we keep going to caffeine, that's probably a flag that we're actually under eating, because coffee or caffeine in itself is not an energy source, it's a neurostim. So we're not actually solving the problem, we're just sticking a few Band-Aids on it, which ultimately towards the end of the day are going to come undone, right? Caffeine, in terms of being a research supplement for performance improvement, is pretty highly regarded. Okay. When we talk about strength in the gym, we're talking about contractile strength. So our ability to contract muscle, and caffeine is super helpful for that. But again, if you're training at night and in the evening, do I want you to load up on caffeine, get your hour and a half training session in, and then lie awake staring at the wall for the next or staring at the ceiling for the next 6 hours because you can't sleep because you're so neurostimmed? No, I don't. Right. So it has its place. It has its place, definitely timing related. But yeah, if you're the half-life on caffeine is probably the other thing to think about too. If it's going to take 6, 7, 8 hours to fully leave the system, even if you can get to sleep after having a coffee at 5 p.m. before 11, you're actually inhibiting your ability to get into that really deep restorative sleep. So use it, but use it wisely, and earlier on in the day is preferable.
Beautiful.
Let's sneak it in.
Yep.
I feel like I'm talking really fast. Can you understand me?
I can. Yeah. No, it's totally fine. For people listening on YouTube, you could like slow down the time too if you're having difficulty, but I'm digesting it all. All right. The next one, we've gotten asked this question in a couple different forms. So I'm going to read them both out. So one is fruit bad for you? And the other one is too much sugar from fruit bad for you?
Okay. So fructose has kind of copped it. So there's a few different types of sugars that get kind of circled in, right? And again, for the most part, are we looking at performance or are we looking at health? Okay. Now, again, for the most part, for the majority of people, if you enjoy eating fruit and you like to eat fruit, and that fruit that you're eating is accounted for and comes in within your caloric goal, your carbohydrate goal, I'm going to say for the general population, my general answer is like, go for it. You know, plenty of great vitamins, minerals, micronutrients that we're going to get from a different array of fruit. Seasonal, it's a great alternative, you know, to processed sugars, right? For people who do enjoy that sweet sensation. But at the same time too, that too much of a good thing, no matter what we're talking about, there's always a tipping point where too much of a good thing is detrimental to us, right? Particularly if we're talking about clients that maybe have type 2 diabetes and we're trying to be super careful about how we spike blood sugars, something like quick acting carbs that you get from fruit, from fructose, we probably want it to be a bit more measured in kind of where and how we're applying it there. But for the most part, I would say if you're super worried about your fructose levels, unless you have been tested, you know, and it's an issue, like a medical issue, you're probably not going to eat enough fruit to really get to that point, right? And obviously don't sugar out there and try to prove me wrong. But I would say if you're getting any allergy testing and it's telling you to stay away from fructose, stay away from fructose, but make sure that allergy testing is not coming from a naturopath. It's coming from a gastroenterologist or a GP. We might have a longer podcast on allergy testings and naturopaths in a different episode. So stay tuned for that.
Perfect. Okay. Next question. Is breakfast the most important meal of the day?
Ooh, good question. Is breakfast the most important meal of the day? Only if you're training in the mornings would be my answer. For my clients who are active, which I encourage them all to be, the most important meals of the day for them are their pre and post workout meals. Okay. So what we're trying to do as a way of generating intensity for improved health and body composition, right? We're trying to make sure that there's fuel in the tank, number one. So we want them eating before they train, and there's fuel in the tank, or the best time to refill the tank, I guess, is after you've emptied it, right? So post-workout. And the reason we want to do that is to, like I said, make sure they have enough energy on board to generate a relative level of intensity that forces their body, forces enough stress on their body to adapt, lay down more lean mass tissue, burn more body fat, right? But also to make sure that they're recovering from those sessions, right? So getting food in pretty decently quickly after you finish training, especially high intensity training. We want to get those recovery mechanisms underway straight away. We want to bring the parasympathetic nervous system back online, rest and digest, start to repair, start to heal, so that we can go back the next day and train again at a high level, right? So like I said before with the carbs question, if you're training at night, arguably your dinner, your last meal after you go to bed is your most important. right? But if you're more active during the day or you're not super active during the day, you probably do want to try and get a little bit more of your daily intake in earlier. So therefore breakfast would be more important in that instance, but it's relative and it depends on the individual.
Perfect. We're at 30, but I could sense that
30 seconds, yeah.
It's coming to an end. I don't want to interrupt you. Excellent. Okay. And this next question is, vegans don't get enough protein. So that's a myth.
Okay. This is always a super touchy subject. So again, I guess let's kind of like look at it from a general perspective, and then maybe we can deep dive into plant-based a little bit later on. In general, generally speaking, it is very rare that we see people converting to a plant-based diet or a vegan diet properly from the beginning. Okay, so what we tend to see is when many people decide to make a drastic change like this, they just completely cut meat product out of their diet, and they don't look to replace the equivalent amount of protein from plant-based sources. All right, inherently, what that tends to lead to is issues with congestion and things like that, but you're also missing out on the nutrients that come from animal product, meat-based product, more than just protein too. So we know like vitamin B12, for example, things like that. So usually, and of course there's exceptions to the rule, there is a way to do plant-based properly. There is a way to do a vegan diet properly. Arguably, in my experience, for performance improvements, it's not necessarily something I would recommend, purely because of the difficulty that can accompany those kind of dietary specifications when it comes to performance, right? Protein being one of them. It's incredibly hard for most people to meet their protein goal, even with chicken, fish, beef, et cetera, let alone to try to have the equivalent in plants and legumes. Tofu, I don't want clients eating a ton of all the time. Soy, right, to get those protein goals. So generally speaking, yeah, it's something that if you're going to decide to do, you need to think a lot about and prepare a lot for, because for the most part, I don't think most people are starting off in a correct fashion, in a healthiest fashion, right? So arguably, and again, look, if you're looking to make dietary changes for performance increase versus health increase, it's a different question. So plant-based might be super applicable for one person and super not applicable for another. But if you're playing like a conscious game and a cruelty game, then no doubt vegan diets are the most cruelty-free diets going around. But it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get healthier from making that choice, right?
Yeah. We are over the 2-minute mark there, but just, I guess.
1:59, I think, Mags.
Quick summary of that answer, because it was great. I think like the myth that vegans don't get enough protein, probably true that, the majority of people who do transfer over to a vegan diet aren't getting enough protein and like you were saying, the nutrients that come with that. But I think if the myth that we were talking about is vegans can't get enough protein, that one's not true.
Correct.
It just takes a lot more effort and thought, like you were saying, to reach those protein goals and the nutrient goals that come with it as well.
Yeah, I think for the most part, like I've copped a bit of flack in people assuming that I'm like anti-plant-based diet or anti-vegan diet, and that's not the case. But what I'm saying is that it's hard enough for people to have a well-balanced diet without making it any more challenging. And essentially, when you do cut, we do have these big lists of, I have the same beef with, keto or Whole30 or paleo, whatever it is. When you start restricting things that people can eat for no medical reason, but purely just for dogmatic purposes, right? You make the mission of like healthy eating much harder. Yeah. So that's inherently what my issue is with plant-based diets, with vegan diets, is saying that we need to acknowledge that like it can be done incorrectly. Most people are doing it incorrectly. So if you want to do it, here's how we need to do it properly, right? Inherently what happens is a lot of people start to do it properly and it is too difficult to continue. We've had plenty of clients that have started off eating meat product, want to try plant-based just to see how they feel, and then realize how hard it is just to sustain over a long period of time. And that is the name of the game when it comes to health and nutrition, is sustainable practice, right? So, if it's something that you feel super strongly about and you want to make this, big decision to change your diet in that kind of manner, that's great. But let's have a chat about that so you're fully aware of what that choice entails and what your kind of dietary intake looks like, right? Like I said before, it's kind of been put on the pedestal, like game changers and shit like that, right? Like they don't acknowledge that it can be done wrong. So you get a whole population of people who have no idea about nutrition practice or principles, all of a sudden trying to cut protein out. And then it's like, and then what happens, right? 3 months down the track. So granted, there are outliers in every circumstance. There's probably, there's great examples of athletes who are at the top of their game and they have a plant-based diet. But what's the likelihood that you're an outlier, right? Statistically, you're not. So understand that, like, yeah, you're more likely, if you don't do your research or don't work with a coach, that you're gonna miss something, right? And that's okay. It's not your job to know how to do that. That's our job, right? Which is like why we do this, But our philosophy and our approach with our plant-based or our vegan clients is exactly the same with our meat-eating clients, And that's kind of the thing when we talk about relative terms, and this is well over 2 minutes, Mag. So I'm just going to assume I'm using this time from all the previous questions. We've whether we're talking about religion or politics or diet, I don't know why, but it's almost like the narrative is it has to be an extreme one way or the other. You have to polarize, right? So it's either, vegans are saying you have to only eat vegan or only eat plant-based diet, as if the only other alternative to that is a carnivore diet where all you're eating is meat. It's not the case. Right? Like you can eat both. You should be eating both. I want all my clients to eat a high quality animal-based product to ensure they get their needs from that, and as many fucking vegetables as they can fit on their plates to make sure that they're getting plenty of fiber and plenty of minerals and vitamins and benefits that come from eating a plant-based diet. Why does it have to be one extreme or the other? Why can't we meet in the middle ground where sustainability and balance actually lives? You don't have to be an alcoholic or be completely sober. You can have a beer, right? You don't have to eat 100% processed foods or 100% whole foods. It's okay to go out for dinner with friends and enjoy a pizza from time to time. We don't need to live in this world of extremes. It's bullshit, right? So that's my rant to finish up on. But it's not good or bad. Context matters. It's not one or the other. There's a middle ground, whether it be diet or politics, right? Like it's kind of like you can like something that's over there and like something that's over here and take the best of both and apply them to you if that's what makes you feel best. Why is that such a hard notion to conceive that could be a possibility, right?
Yeah. Well, this wouldn't be a coach's chat if we didn't have a Ben rant. So there we go.
Thank you for coming to my TED Talk.
Well, I'm glad I left that question for the end.
Yeah.
Good way to wrap things up too. But yeah, so these were all really great questions, and I hope that everybody had some takeaways. And of course, keep the questions coming because we want to do another one of these before the month is up. And we'll do them whenever people throw questions at us. But I think it's a good excuse to have this one specific month to get as many questions as we can and explain as many things as we possibly can. And I think keeping it short and concise will hopefully help people digest the information as well.
No promises on that, but I am trying my best, right? But I have enjoyed the questions coming in from the community and the amount of questions too. I think that sometimes, Mags, as coaches, we take our nutritional knowledge for granted. And I think sometimes that we allow that to extend, into our community too. And that's really something that we need to be mindful of is that, it's such a big, we don't know everything, right? And it's kind of that, the further and deeper we go and the more we know, the more we realize we don't know. So this is something that we're doing full time, and we still have questions, right, that we ask. And I think that's great that the community feels, there's not an assumption that they should know these things and that they can't ask questions, because ultimately, we want them to be asking questions often and as many as they have so that they can get some actual reliable knowledge and information, right?
Yeah, and it's, one of the main ways that we learn as coaches is by having coached for so many years and being asked so many questions and then need to research these questions and provide an answer. So really appreciate them all coming through. So keep them coming.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Well, thanks for sticking around and listening to this. Like I said, if you have any questions or want to chat about any of these specifics with one of the coaches, just reach out, let us know, comment below. And we'll be happy to have a chat with you.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Thanks, Mags.
Thanks, Ben. Catch you next time.